Shawn Fain, the leader of the UAW in North America, has demanded that General Motors, Ford and Stellantis pay its workers 46% more and give them an extra day off every single week. In fact, he says workers should not have to work any more than 32 hours per week. Now, I've personally got to say, I would love a deal like that. YouTube, pay me 46% more and let me work one less day per week. Fair is fair. Come on, guys. This is quite an extraordinary situation here. The strike has now been officially approved. These are the demands the union are making. What on earth are Ford, General Motors and Stellantis going to do? I mean, this is desperate times. Does this call for desperate measures? Absolutely. What are they going to do? I don't know how they could possibly meet these demands. Very, very interesting to see what happens, because people are saying, analysts are saying that this is going to have a catastrophic effect for these three major automakers. These are three biggest automakers in North America, three of the biggest in the world. What exactly will this mean? Hello, my friends. Welcome to the channel. It's great to see you. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Sam Evans. You're watching the Electric Viking. And I need to point out a caveat here before I continue here. Some of these demands I think are reasonable. Sounds crazy, right? Sounds absolutely insane. It does. But here's some context. The unions have negotiated a wage increase at General Motors' battery factory. Now, I reported on the wages at GM's battery factory, the new one where Mary Barra had a big sook and whine on public television saying, blaming people, blaming staff, saying she couldn't find staff in the state, saying it wasn't her fault, it wasn't GM's fault, it was a fault of people not wanting to work for General Motors in their new battery factory. But she's only willing to pay them $16 per hour. It was less than what McDonald's workers are making. Utterly ridiculous. Now, obviously, she did not mention this to the media. She hoped the media wouldn't even notice that that was the case. Those workers have received a 25% pay increase. That's absolutely deserved. I mean, come on. What they were getting paid by General Motors was a disgrace. It was a joke. So, I think the union's demands there were completely reasonable. A 25% increase on peanuts, it's still not that much. I think even more than 25% could be a good thing. Now, I agree with the concept that Jim Rohn says, you get paid for value, not for hours. Maybe that's what Fain himself is trying to say. These workers should be remunerated on their value, not for the hours that they've worked. But it's kind of hard to make that work in a car factory. How exactly do you work out what someone contributes in terms of value? Especially when the union is dictating their value, not the employees and the workplace or the employer itself. So let's have a look at what he's actually saying. Well, first of all, he says he's declared war on Detroit's three automakers. His contract demands, he's calling audacious. He's calling for a 46% pay rise, a return to traditional pensions, and a 32-hour work week. And what does he mean by return to traditional pensions? Well, a lot of staff at these companies now, these big automakers now, are not permanent. It's much easier for these companies to not have to pay you permanently, not have to get rid of you. And obviously, if you're a permanent employee, much harder to fire you. You have to get a payout, that sort of thing. So that's part of the reason that General Motors, Ford and Stellantis have basically shrunk their permanent staff over the last decade as much as possible. Basically now it's very, very hard to get a permanent position, as in like a full-time permanent position at one of these automakers. Now, Fain, who is 54 years old and began working as an electrician at a Chrysler casting plant in 1994, is threatening to take his 150,000 UAW members out on strike. It's been approved within the past 24 hours. If he doesn't have contracts with General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler parent Stellantis by the September 14 deadline, the UAW will strike all three simultaneously, putting the automotive industry in North America into complete chaos. The deadline is the deadline, Fain said in an interview earlier this month at the UAW Solidarity House headquarters along the Detroit River. Fain, whose demeanor leans more Sunday school teacher, according to Automotive News, than fire-breathing union leader, has brought back a tough talking style evoking the labor movement roots in America. The truth is, though, he's been firing from the mouth all year this year, and I'm not really convinced in some of the things he's done and said. He says that he's at war with them, or these companies, and I mean, as of today, I get that, but he's been saying he's been at war with them now for more than 6 months. He says that the relationship between himself, the union, and Ford and General Motors and Stellantis is all broke down irrevocably. Irrevocably? That seems a bit dramatic. He's also said that Stellantis, when they closed down their factory, the Jeep factory, recently, he's blamed them. He said it's Stellantis' fault. They shouldn't have done that, even though the factory was losing money, making vehicles that no one was buying anymore. They didn't really have a choice. It's like having a restaurant that sells, I don't know, some sort of burgers, and no one wants those burgers anymore. You don't have much choice. You just have to move on. Anyway, Fain has said he's part of a new generation of leaders like International Brotherhood of Teamsters President Sean O'Brien, who earlier this month won a historic 5-year contract with United Parcel Services Inc. and Lynn Fox, president of Workers United, which says it has unionized more than 350 Starbucks Corporation stores. These aggressive Labour leaders want to rewrite the social compact with everyday workers around a simple question: why not us? The pandemic and technology allowed more salaried staffers than ever to work from home. Now service and factory workers who had faced COVID's dangers on the job want to improve their work-life balance too. And inflation eating into everyone's pocketbooks, polls show there's growing support for the Labour movement. The thing is here, guys, there's a big conundrum here. Tesla is already a 100% EV-only car company, and they make a profit on their cars. May not be a significant profit, but it is a profit. There is no other automaker in North America making any single, not even $1 in profit on any EVs they sell. None. We know that from all the reports we've seen. No one is claiming to be making a profit either. It's pretty certain that they are not doing so. Ford are losing between 22 to 32,000 on every EV they sell, depending on the quarter that you look at. However, less than 3% of all the cars that Ford sell worldwide and in North America are electric. General Motors isn't much better, around 3 to 4%. Stellantis, pretty much the same deal. In fact, Stellantis don't have any Chrysler EVs at all. They have a hybrid Jeep, and that's about it. So you can see how things look for their future. Tesla is saying, we're about to build an enormous factory in Mexico, making a car for $25,000 US, that we will sell more of than every single model we have now combined. Tesla say they'll sell more Model 2s, or whatever you want to call it, than they do Model 3, Model Y, Model S, Model X, and Cybertruck and Semi combined. In fact, they say double sales of all of those, and still they'll sell more Model 2s than all of those. So where are these sales coming from? Japanese automakers? Sure, they'll take some of those sales, no question. But with their competition really failing to ramp up EV production, and now being in a situation where their workers may not actually work for them at some point in the future, and then at the same time having enormous debts to deal with and being disrupted by companies such as Tesla and even companies such as Rivian as well. Think about it. Their pickup trucks are their bread and butter, but they still have to sell cars. And if their workers won't work unless they're getting paid 46% more and working 4 days per week or 32 hours per week, then that's a pretty difficult position for them to be in. Fain won a narrow victory of less than 1% by positioning himself as a reformer out to overhaul a union rocked by a corruption scandal. 13 UAW officials were convicted of illegally using union fees to finance lavish lifestyles, and the union remains under the oversight of a federal monitor. When the scandal first came to light, Fain said it was a gut punch, but he'd had suspicions because the union leadership delivered weak contracts in times of prosperity. We have a horrible history in this union of setting expectations low and setting lower and settling lower, Fain said. Those days are over. Now it's payback time, says Fain. For union members swindled out of good deals as auto companies banked record profits while giving hourly workers 2 to 3% raises over the past 4 years that failed to keep up with inflation. Now, I'm not certain that's true, but that's what he's claiming. Mary Barra made $200 million in the last 9 years, said Fain, referring to GM CEO company filings which confirm this. Our wages went backwards, if you include inflation. There's something wrong there. Now, Fain has a point here, and I've long contended, no one seems to watch my videos when I talk about this, that CEOs in North America are overcompensated. But not only North America, Europe as well. Amazingly, executives and CEOs at companies that underperform, such as Ford and General Motors, in my opinion, have been getting compensated regardless of company performance. We're talking salaries of between 16 to 26 million US dollars annually. And that's not just CEOs. That's executives that you probably never heard of as well. So I have to admit, some of that wealth should probably be distributed a little more evenly. Fain says Automakers' recent record profits were made possible by UAW concessions given during the government bailouts and bankruptcies of General Motors and Chrysler in the Great Recession of 2009. Now he wants to make up for those sacrifices, plus a whole lot more. Beyond big raises and a shorter work week, the UAW demands include restoring cost of living increases, an end to a tiered system that pays new workers less, restoring retiree healthcare, and boosting pension payments. The automakers counter that meeting those demands would threaten their existence, driving up labor costs by 80 billion US dollars and increasing total pay and benefit expenses to more than 150 US dollars per hour, from about $64 per hour now. As the Detroit 3 automakers collectively spend more than $100 billion to make the shift to electric vehicles, they contend they can't afford a generous contract with the UAW. The other thing here to consider is these hourly fees, whilst they sound relatively high, and they seem like they are to me, I don't know what you think, but let me know in the comments. Do you agree with that? It's worth looking at the reality here. These automakers are trying to automate more of their production. They won't need as many workers. General Motors has fired nearly 8,000 staff this year already. However, they've got a fair way to go yet before they get to the automation levels of a company like Tesla. If anything though, if these automakers do agree to these demands, then the acceleration towards maximum possible production line automation will cost jobs. These automakers will have no choice but to automate with robotics everything they possibly can. Higher labor costs contributed to Chrysler, Ford, and GM's lack of price competitiveness against foreign brands in the 90s and the 2000s. But pressure is on Fain to deliver a good deal since his margin of victory was so slim. The car companies cannot possibly agree to his demands, and even if he succeeds, his members still lose because the car companies will go bankrupt. Johan Denissen, a consultant, former GM and Volkswagen executive, said in an interview. Fain, he added, is promising the sun, the moon, the earth, and the stars to people who are frankly easily impressed. Fain bristles at the notion that his blue-collar members are asking for too much. He sees the company's arguments about being competitive as code for a race back to slave labor. He points to Stellantis North American COO Mark Stewart, who recently lectured workers on economic realism from his vacation home in Acapulco, Mexico. Stellantis declined to comment on Stewart's whereabouts. When your CEOs are making 300 to 400 times more than the average worker, and they want to talk to you about economic realism, that's pretty pathetic, said Fain. Fain carried his grandmother's Bible for his swearing in as UAW president, said Automotive News. It was given to her as a child during the Great Depression, when she and her siblings were dropped at an orphanage in Tennessee because their parents couldn't afford to care for them. Years later, she and her husband migrated north for work at a Chrysler factory, forever changing the trajectory of the Fain family. I get a little emotional, Fain said, his voice catching. I was raised to never forget where you come from, and it's why what I do matters to me. He grew up in Kokomo, Indiana, where his father joined the police force and rose to police chief, and his mother earned a nursing degree after staying home with their children while they were young. They could pursue those careers because their parents landed jobs in Chrysler and GM factories at a time when auto work was the gold standard, said Fain. My grandparents lived the American dream. They were destitute in the hills of Tennessee and Kentucky, so they migrated north for good-paying union jobs, and it changed their lives. Fain's father was deeply involved in Democratic politics, and Sean grew up putting out yard signs, knocking on doors, and going on chili suppers, he said. I hated it as a kid, but his attitude changed after he was laid off early in his career and had to rely on government assistance to buy diapers and formula for the first of his 2 daughters. It was a humbling experience, he said, but I wouldn't trade it because being on unemployment and trying to survive on $80 a week really made me understand how the system works. Fain, who became a journeyman electrician 3 decades ago, says he's living proof that you don't have to go to college to earn a good living. I went to an apprenticeship program and it was life-changing. My brother and sister have both master's degrees and I've out-earned both of them. Now, I'm not really particularly impressed by the fact that he's letting everyone know that he's out-earned his brother and his sister. In my opinion, that's the kind of thing you keep private. You don't have to, publicly disparage your own family members. And that, to me, it does reveal a part of Fain's character that I find a bit abhorrent personally. Sort of self-aggrandizement. Anyway, before going to work at Chrysler, Fain was a member of the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 873 in Kokomo, where on top of his apprenticeship, he put in 1,200 class hours to earn an associate degree in applied science. His former IBEW members don't doubt his resolve. He doesn't bend or waver. Michael Young, business manager at Local 873, said in an interview, he has lofty goals. There's no doubt. But you have to shoot for the moon on this one. Fain is trying to set the table for what he calls a just transition to the electric vehicle future. The Detroit 3 are in the process of building 9 battery plants, all joint ventures with partners from Asia. The fate of those thousands of battery workers who are not yet hired or represented by the UAW hangs on the bargaining table. At GM's battery factory in Lordstown, Ohio, workers initially started at $15 an hour, less than half the top wage at UAW represented assembly plants. A recent deal will boost pay by around $4 an hour, which is still far less than what Fain wants. He fears those workers will also have fewer job and safety protections. In May, Fain went to the local union hall in Lordstown where, according to multiple union members who were present, he declared that this is an existential fight. He asked workers to sign a card pledging they are all in to get battery workers a better contract. Fain also enlisted the help of President Joe Biden, who, after meeting with the UAW leader at the White House last month, issued a statement calling for a fair transition to EVs with contracts that retool, reboot, and rehire in the same factories and communities at comparable wages, while giving existing workers the first shot to fill those jobs. Yet on Friday, Biden expressed concern about the impact of a possible UAW strike. Fain wants battery plant jobs to go to UAW members displaced at factories building engines, transmissions, and conventional cars closed. The process is already underway. Stellantis recently idled a 58-year-old factory in Belvidere, Illinois, that most recently built internal combustion engine Jeeps. Fain displays particular contempt for the company he worked for and its CEO, Carlos Tavares, the CEO of Stellantis, who's been outspoken on the need to cut overheads and people. Their only meeting, Fain said, came before official bargaining began, where the executive used the word brutality about 40 times to describe government mandates on the transition to EVs. I came back and said our workers have had a brutality imposed upon them. You close plants and they have to uproot their lives. As contract talks come down to the wire, Fain's ambitions go well beyond the meat and potato issues. He is out to change the way people think about and treat factory labour. Workers are fed up, said Fain. If COVID taught anybody anything, it taught people what's important in life. And it sure as hell isn't living in your workplace 7 days a week so you can scrape to get by and barely survive. The problem with this all is that Fain is really out of touch with the way that a modern automotive factory works. Now, yes, today it has a lot of staff doing very manual intensive jobs. However, that is all changing. Robotics are changing quickly. I recently watched a video where the most recent robotics conference was held. All the best robot technicians and all the best robots around the world were shown, and they all competed against each other. Robots are advancing quickly. It won't be long before many of these people will be replaced by robots. Eventually, it couldn't be all of them. Not far away, Tesla is building its own robot. It's also automating its production lines. The truth, my friends, is that even though today human beings are very much well needed on the factory floor, that will change by the end of the decade. Unfortunately, the reality is here that we need to retrain and reskill these workers for an oncoming digital revolution. If we don't, it doesn't matter what Fain wants. The future will simply move on without him and the UAW. But I could be wrong. Let me know what you think in the comments. Thank you for watching.